Hello everyone, welcome live to Minneapolis here in the heart of the United States. Rich Hagan, your host, alongside Pro Tour champion Simon Gertzen, and from the play design team inside R&D from Renton, Washington, Mr. Paul Cheon. Great to have you with us, gentlemen, here as we bring you our Pro Tour preview. It is the biggest Pro Tour in Magic history, part of your $1 Million Magic Weekend. $850,000 will be given away to teams, there's the big word right off the bat, here at the Pro Tour. It's going to be an amazing 3 days starting tomorrow with a little side dish of the Silver Showcase each evening and then on Sunday morning with the final. So, Paul, what are you looking forward to this weekend out of our main event, the Pro Tour?
I'm really looking forward to kind of just watching Legacy. You know, recently there were a couple of big bannings in both Deathrite Shaman and Gitaxian Probe, and that has really shaken up the metagame. And I'm really interested to see kind of what people choose to bring here. And we haven't seen Legacy being played at the Pro Tour level in a very long time. So I'm really, really excited to see people look and like kind of how the adjustments that people made.
Right, and there are some very, very talented Legacy players on show who perhaps aren't necessarily the big name pros that we recognize the names of, but by the end of this weekend, they could have carved themselves out a real slice of Magic history by demonstrating their Legacy excellence. Simon, how about you?
For me, it's teams. Just having a team Pro Tour is amazing. Team Trios is interesting, but not too complex. You can just focus on your decks, your meta game, your sideboarding. But then at the same time, people next to you are going to play a completely different format, and they want your help when you when they need to mulligan. And that's kind of how do the teams solve this? That's the big question for me.
Simon's already talked about different formats. We're going to hear a lot more about that in just a moment. But teams is the focus. And of course, our team series have teams of 6. But they're playing as teams of 3. Well, fortunately, math, we asked Frank Karsten, he tells us that this does divide neatly. Here's BDM to tell us more.
Thanks, Rich. What I'm really looking for in the this last team series event of the Pro Tour season is this left side of my screen, these top 5 teams who all have more than 110 points to finalize those last 2 berths at the World Championship for the Team Series Finals last year. It was Team Musashi that defeated Team Genesis. Both of those teams still here in the top 5. It does not look, though, like we'll get a rematch. Let's take a look at our first team here, Team Ultimate Guard. And this is a titanic team. And at the end of the last Pro Tour, when I was standing at this wall, I was talking about Owen Turtenwald, who was still looking for his first Pro Tour victory. And I think that everyone who has like handicapped this field, Owen Turtenwald, Reed Duke, and William Jensen, the Peach Garden Oath, one of the most accomplished pro teams at the Team Grand Prix level, seeing the 3 of them get a chance to prepare for this event and play together, I feel like this could be a real huge opportunity for Owen and Reed to get that first victory in their already illustrious careers. And of course, when your B team is John Finkel, Paul Rietzel, and Andrew Cuneo, you're in great shape. They have a huge lead in this team series, Team Ultimate Guard, and they're going to be really hard pressed to be caught by any team. Let's take a look at who is chasing them, though. And you see Team How Are You Yalat, and they're in second place with 125 points. Luis Salvato, the Pro Tour champion. Marcio Carvalho, another top 8. Carlos Ramao, the former world champion. This is just another team of very powerful players who will be looking to hold this lead and get to play at the World Championship in the team series. Someone I'm really keeping an eye on here is Lucas Esperber too. Curious to see where he ends up in terms of the formats for teams. Let's keep moving on, and then we will take a look at Connected Company. We just watched Raphael Levy draft in the Silver Showcase. What's interesting to me about this team being in 3rd place with 116 points is that they've done it with Raphael Levy, the Hall of Famer, skipping a Pro Tour. He had to skip a Pro Tour for the birth of his child, and at the beginning of the season, you felt like, wow, this is going to be a huge blow for this team. One of their most experienced players not being there, but they've really pulled it together. They're in great shape here, and Javier Dominguez, someone who has been ascendant on the Pro Tour for the last 2 seasons. Be curious to see what he can do here at the end of the year. Let's see who's right behind them. You see Musashi. This is the Pro Tour Team Series champions from last year. They won the inaugural tournament. They returned this team, and it's going to be Ken Yukihiro, who, by the way, is entering onto the Hall of Fame ballot this year, who, you know, we'll see what he does, because we've seen this guy, 4 different Pro Tour top 8s, play 4 different completely unexpected decks. Really curious to see whether he ends up doing Modern or ends up doing Legacy and what he brings to the table, because he's been one of the most exciting constructed players to watch since his first Pro Tour top 8 back at Pro Tour Avison Restored. And then in 5th place, we see Musashi's opponents from that Pro Tour Team Series Finals last season, Team Genesis, Lucas Blohan, of course, the Pro Tour champion, Brian Brown-Duin, the world champion, Martin Mueller, the World Magic Cup champion, Brad Nelson, the Player of the Year, Seth Manfield, also a world champion, and Corey Baumeister, just one of the best players in Standard at the Grand Prix circuit, and 111 points. Probably not going to catch Team Ultimate Guard, but can they get themselves into 2nd place? It'll be really interesting to see how this team fares. You know, they have a couple of titans of Standard split up in the 2 brothers, Corey Baumeister and Brad Nelson, split up across 2 different 3-person teams. It'll be really exciting to watch and see where that all ends up.
Thanks very much, BDM. Now, not 1, not 2, but 3 constructed formats coming at you this weekend. The first of those on the front table in the feature match area is Legacy. Here to tell you all about it, Maria Bartholdi.
Hi there, thanks Rich, and I've got Marshall with me here, and we're sitting at the Legacy table, Marshall. Yeah. So you're finally in the feature match area.
By the way, this is a nice seat to be at.
Yeah, you might not want to leave.
Yeah.
Okay, so Legacy, a lot of players love it. A lot of people haven't ever played it or watched it. Mm-hmm. How does the battlefield look different in Legacy than other formats?
Yeah, so Legacy is significantly different from both Modern and Standard in that there's far fewer things actually going on the table at any given time. Many of the format-defining cards don't actually affect or sit on the battlefield, or if they do, they're not there for very long before the game's already over. Cards like Show and Tell, any of the Storm-based cards don't matter. Brainstorm is kind of the iconic card of the format, and all of these are cards that you haven't had. Even Wasteland, like, sure, it hits the battlefield, but often it's gone and their thing's gone, and there's this sort of resource management thing happening, which means, again, there's just not a lot going on until one explosive turn or one flurry right between the 2. And so when you watch it, there's a lot more emphasis on spells and things happening in hand. Right. Rather than
the game is played in your hand and not necessarily on the battlefield.
That's right. The other thing that you'll note is that the games are more compressed. You know, the further back you go in Magic, generally speaking, the more things happen over the course of a turn as the spells get cheaper, and Legacy's absolutely that. I mean, the average cost of some of these decks is like 1.5 mana, you know, for some of the Delver-style decks, that kind of thing.
And we've had some pretty big bans in this format recently, too. Gitaxian Probe and Deathrite Shaman, or as I like to call them, Dr. S.
DRS, yeah. Yes. Yeah, and you know, there's a big question right now in the format on how big of an impact will these have, because these weren't necessarily linchpins for certain decks, right? It's not like, well, that deck's gone, but a card like Gitaxian Probe was played in a lot of different decks, and now we get to find out which ones really needed it and which ones are like, well, I'll have to find the next best option. And when it comes to Deathrite Shaman, the real question is, it was actually actively stopping certain types of strategies. And did that open the floodgates on maybe some graveyard-style decks or something like that to now take their place in the format? And, you know, we get to find out a lot of that this weekend.
Awesome. Thanks, Marshall. Yeah. Back up to you.
So that's Legacy on our front table. Now, Paul, in Legacy, we've got about 165, 166 teams. So there are 166 Legacy players in the room. Do you expect them to gravitate towards a fairly safe choice in the center of the format, wherever that might be? Or is Legacy a format where so many players are very much coming with their deck, which they've been playing for 3, 5, 10, 15 years?
Well, so the thing with Legacy, I mean, it's actually very similar to something like Modern, where you can really bring any deck to the table, and as long as you've mastered that deck, you're going to massively increase the chances you have of winning with that deck. We've seen, you know, Storm specialists, Death and Taxes specialists, and, you know, these guys just continue to put up top 8 events with these decks because, you know, these decks are very, very complex. There's just so much to them that the amount of time that you spend mastering these decks really, really pays off. And I think at the end of the day, that's really what's most important in a format as complex as Legacy.
Right, and Simon, that may mean that we don't see huddles of 3 players round the Legacy player, that actually the Legacy player will be left to show that they master their own deck and just get on in their lane.
I actually think that's the better strategy, because you don't want somebody else talking into your game when you are actually 3 turns ahead, or you've already resolved brainstorm, knowing that you have to play around a certain card coming from your opponent. I don't want my neighbor to tell me something about what's going on the board, because that's not really relevant.
Okay, so Legacy is on the front table. What's in the middle? It's Modern. Here's Maria.
Hi, I'm down here with Riley, and we're here to talk Modern. I gotta say, first of all, great jacket, Riley.
Thanks very much. Yes, purchase by hand.
So tell me about Modern. What's the million-mile view of this format?
Modern is it's the best format. It's great. I mean, you're going to agree with me here. It is.
I love Modern.
It is the stone cold best. But some of the characteristics of this format, it's so open. It's such a diverse format. It's so wide. It's really the only similarity, the only common theme amongst all of the decks that you're going to play is that there is no common theme amongst all the decks. There are aggressive decks, mid-range decks, there's combo decks, there's control decks. No matter how you like to play Magic, there is an option for you. There are 20 to 30 tier 1 tournament viable decks you can play in Modern, and that for me is the most important and the best thing about the format.
So whatever you like to play, you can play it. And a lot of these players have been doing exactly that for quite a long time. They know these decks inside and out, right?
We're going to see high-level play this weekend in the Modern format, and not necessarily for the reasons you're thinking. We've got, of course, the greatest minds in the Magic universe assembled here in Minneapolis this weekend, but we've also got people who have been playing their Modern decks for a decade or longer. People who've been playing Affinity for 11, 12 years. People who've been playing black-green mid-range strategies, whether it's Abzan, Jund, or just black-green. The mastery that these people have with the decks that they're playing is going to show you the potential of a format like Modern to really just knock your socks off in terms of high-level, masterful play.
Is there a deck that you're specifically kind of looking forward to seeing?
You betcha. Oh yeah, absolutely. Anyone who has followed me even remotely when talking about Modern will know that I'm an absolute sucker for Celestial Colonnade. A friend of mine pointed out that even though it's not at its best right now, this card is going to be people are going to lose with this card all weekend, he said. But look, I'm 100% on Team White Blue. White Blue Control is a slow grindy deck that has a fantastic matchup against. It's got a very wide range of answers against the format. There are more proactive Jeskai strategies with Geist of Saint Trap, Spellqueller, and then the slower ones, the Jeskai Control, which we've seen superstars like Seth Manfield play recently. So. For me, that's the deck that I've got my eye on, but there's all sorts of new technology emerging. We've got Mardu as a mid-range grind fest. We've got Hollow One as this explosive, almost combo-like deck. There's Tron always going to get you with that turn 3 because they've always got the turn 3.
They've always got it.
We're going to see all sorts of stuff this weekend, and I couldn't be happier about it.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Riley. Back to you.
So, Simon, we're again in a situation where 166 players are playing in Modern. That's not a giant tournament. That's not like a Grand Prix of 1,500, 2,000 players. So 10% of the field, 15 or so players, 15, 16 players. How would you describe the format? Every format has its edges. It's like it's turn 1 combo equivalent, or it's super grindy control. But is Modern mostly sort of fairly central, or are we going to see a lot of very extreme matchups? How would you describe it?
So Modern is definitely a polarizing format. You have just certain matchups that are almost impossible to win unless you sideboard very heavily against it. But then again, if I look at the aggro decks in Modern, the aggressive strategies, and some of them are combo-esque, there's 5 or 6 of them, and you only have 15 sideboard cards. So sideboard cards are hugely relevant. And one thing that I wanted to mention, Legacy has Force of Will. Modern doesn't. So you don't have this safety valve that just keeps certain things in check. And we see I know Riley is a big fan of blue-white control.
Sure.
I wouldn't touch control decks with a long pole.
Right, because that's the old standby about if you're going to have the right answers, you need to know all the questions.
If you tell me you have to beat Goblin Chainroller and Steel Leaf champion, then I know what to do. If you tell me you have to beat Burn, Affinity, Humans, Hollow One, Vengevine combo, it's just too much.
Simon, I am going to tell you have to beat Goblin Chainwhirler and Steel Leaf Champion, because that must mean it's our back table in the feature match area, and that means standard. Here's Marie again.
I'm here with Tim Willoughby, and we are sitting in the standard seat for the players here in the feature match area. All right, Tim, standard. What is the pace of that format going to be like compared to Legacy and Modern, do you think?
Well, it's definitely slower than Modern. Modern has the potential to just be a rip-roaring format that ends really fast. Legacy, it can kind of go one or two ways. The decks do what they want to do, they close things out super fast. Otherwise, you can have some really long controlling matchups. I would say that we're going to see a lot of matches over the course of this weekend where the final conclusion of the match happens in standard.
Right here, in this seat,
Yeah,
nonetheless.
right by the Lotus. We're the closest to the Lotus, and I think this is where we're going to see a lot of matches ending, just because the pace of standard typically a little bit slower than we see in the other formats.
And red has kind of been the story of standard for a while now. Do you think it's still going to be dominant at this Pro Tour?
It's interesting because at the same time that we saw a big shake-up in Legacy with Deathrite Shaman and
Gitaxian
Gitaxian
Probe
Probe going away, we didn't see any changes to standard, and we gradually have seen the power of the red decks. I mean, they're still very powerful, but other decks have started to crop up to be able to play around them. So some of the big green decks that can just go larger, some of the control decks that have got a better feel for what they need to do in the format. That means that I think it is a little bit more open. And then, of course, we also have a whole new set on our hands. I'm not necessarily suggesting the new set's going to completely change the format. Based on my own testing, I don't think that's true. But there are little bits and pieces that just mean there's a few other decks in the format, but they've got room to play.
So Vinemare put some pants on it. Is that what you're telling me?
I mean, if you want to do that, it's actually a really strong thing to do. So it definitely doesn't hurt. Hexproof, as it turns out, just powerful in every format you can play it.
All right, thanks, Tim. Back up to you guys.
All right, so I'm going to go away and think about putting pants on a Vinemare. Not something that ever crossed my mind before, I must admit. So, 3 hours into the live broadcast, and the Pro Tour hasn't even begun. 3 more days await. The best players, the best decks, the best formats, and the small matter of the Silver Showcase. $1 million coming your way over the next 3 days of action. We can't wait to bring it all to you. For Paul, for Simon, all the team here, don't you dare miss a thing. 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, it's time to get into high gear for more $1 Million Magic.